So, we're already coming up on the second keynote today. We're going to stick with the subject, but we're going to take in a new perspective. We hear from someone who's shaped digital health solutions from the beginning, because the big question was how to evaluate them, how to trust them, how to reimburse them, and of course initially in the UK, which is where you're from, but then for the world again. Governance and innovation sometimes seem at odds, they're opposites, but no, you will show us how they can be actually enablers of each other. You are the person who has helped define frameworks that make digital health safe, credible, and scalable. Ladies and gentlemen, here on stage, the most wonderful CEO of Orcha, Liz Ashall-Payne. Please tell us more about it. Thank you.
So thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. It's a real honour. The thing that you didn't hear was why I got into this space of really caring about digital health and how we can build trust in digital health and AI. And what I want to share with you is that this has been a lifelong passion for me, way before technology even existed. So when I was 16 at school, I was asked the same question that I'm sure you were all asked. And that was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I thought, I don't know what I want to be, but I know what I want to do. I want to help more people have access to health. And this has been my lifelong passion. But I decided at the time to go in and become a clinician, and I trained as a speech and language therapist. And on my first day in clinic, I was so excited because I thought, today I am going to help people. And at the end of the day, I felt really frustrated. And my frustration was simply because I could only see one person at a time. And I had a huge backlog of people waiting. And I knew that they needed my help too. And so this is nearly 30 years ago, but it's put me on a passionate, equal measures of passion and frustration at wanting to drive more healthcare to more people. But of course, if we're going to do that job, we need to know what we can trust. And I know that as somebody who lives with type 1 diabetes, I am not using a technology that I don't trust. And I'm certainly not going to recommend a technology to my patient if I don't trust it. And so I got really interested in digital health and AI because I was obsessed with the problem and how these tools could really help us to shift the way in which healthcare is delivered. So I want to start with some stats. So there's been a lot of talk at this conference about technology and AI and what's out there. You may be surprised to know just how big that space is. So when I'm talking about digital health, of course I'm talking about apps, but I'm also talking about websites and AI. And as of today, there's about somewhere between 350 and 400,000 technologies out there for us to use. And every single day, 5 million people, this is a global stat, will download and use a digital health technology. 5 million people. It's massive. The thing that's also really interesting is we bought the infrastructure. So there are currently more smartphones on the planet than there are toilets or toothbrushes. And that's because many of us have two. We also know that age isn't the barrier it once was. So over 65% of people aged 65 and above want to use digital health. And in fact, the most recent Ofcom report in the UK showed that the highest users of the smartphone device are aged 65 and above. They've got time. We're all at work. And we also know that physicians and clinicians want to use these technologies. And you can see that exponential growth in technologies in one area like mental health. So it's fast. So the question then, for me, is why haven't we adopted this faster? If everybody's got the infrastructure, we've got the technologies, Clinicians want to use it, people want to use it, what's going wrong? Well, the biggest thing that's going wrong is that if you look on the right-hand side of my slide, this is based on a piece of research that was done with governments and policy leads. And it asked them, what is the biggest barrier to adopting these technologies? And 46% of policy leads said, there's simply too many solutions. I don't know how to navigate this space. And then the next 25% and 18% said that they didn't know what the quantifiable outcomes or ROI would be of these technologies. Even though, on the left-hand side, you can see that technology really can drive more capacity and reduce demand on our healthcare systems. So that's a big problem, and this is a global issue. And it's not unfounded. So Orcha has to date run over 40,000 assessments. And of those assessments, we found that 20% of technologies out there are meeting the minimum criteria. I'll come on to talk about what that means in a second. But what that means is for the 5 million people every day who are downloading a technology, most of our citizens are downloading something that is not safe, that is not fit for purpose. And that can't be good for us either. And so it's a real minefield. Now, I've shared with you my background as a clinician. And for me, when I saw the rise of digital health, I thought, right, I want to start using these things as a person, but also as a clinician. And I didn't know what to find, what was out there, what I could trust. But yet I was finding some amazing technologies that maybe I had been introduced to. And then I thought, this is crazy. We've got this amazing opportunity, and we've got a system that is struggling. How do we bring these two things together? And so I started thinking, well, how do we distribute other things in health and healthcare safely and at scale? And the obvious thing to think about is medication and drugs. So hands up if you've ever bought a medication over the counter. I can imagine that there's very few people that haven't. Hands up if you have had a drug prescribed to you. Yeah, okay, great. So we all use that system, we're all confident to use it, and doctors are happy to use that system to prescribe drugs. And that's because there's a clear system for that drug to get into your hand. And bear with me because it sounds so simple, but then I'm going to use this analogy throughout the presentation. Before a drug gets to market, it is checked for safety and effectiveness. It sounds really, really simple. In the world of digital health, it's not. Anybody can put anything out there. So we have a pre-market assessment and evaluation. Once that drug gets to the market, we have a workforce who know about the drugs. Again, it sounds so basic. The next thing is we have a clear distribution model. And that distribution model can either be direct to consumers or prescribed through a doctor if it's part of your clinical care. So a really clear distribution. And of course, if you do get prescribed a drug, there's governance attached. We know who that drug went to, did they pick it up from the pharmacy, and if we find a fault, a problem with that drug in the future, we know where to go to recall it. Now, if you think about that as a system, it's quite a simple 5-step system. The world of digital health has just exploded. We're all using these things, but yet there is no system. And one of the things that I come across a lot are that policy leads and governments focus on the standard, the criteria for trusting, not on the system. And what I'm here to tell you is that a standard alone will never work. You need a system to deploy it. So how does this work in the world of digital health? So when I founded Orcha, and this is 11 years ago, I wanted to create the system that mirrored the system we have for drug distribution. Now, the first thing to say is when you think about assessment and evaluation, it's completely different to a drug. Not least because the technology keeps changing. So this cannot be a one-off assessment. So you need an infrastructure that allows for continuous assessment. Otherwise, you're telling somebody that something was safe, not that it is. The second thing is you then need to support the workforce in knowing about the process and also the products. So, doctors know a range of different drugs that they can prescribe. We need them to know a range of different technologies in their area of specialism that they can now deploy. We now need a prescription infrastructure that allows for products to be prescribed along clinical care pathways so that we can track who got what and ideally reimburse it, not at point of prescription, at point of download and usage. And therein you have this world of data that Mo can then use in his platform. But it's trusted data because we've done the evaluation. But equally, we need a direct-to-consumer as well. I download products myself to help me manage my own health. So we also need to think about a distribution channel. And we're starting to see that emerge in other countries. So it's almost like the equivalent of online retail for digital, but you're ultimately avoiding the app stores and just Dr. Google and downloading independently. And of course, the tracking and governance is really important, particularly for government agencies. We need to install a safe system that allows for recall should it be required. And it has been required. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about what you need to think about if you're going to assess and evaluate. The first thing I'm going to do is tell you what not to do. Don't use user ratings. You probably already knew that, but this is a piece of research that was published, I think in 2024, that actually looked at the correlation of user ratings and quality, and there is zero connection. So don't use the user ratings, is the first thing to say. The second thing to say is there are lots and lots of different countries who are looking at this as a problem and thinking, well, what criteria should we set that we can trust? And that's a really important question, and it's a policy question. And we've seen quite a few digital health assessment frameworks emerge. So a famous one is the DIGA in Germany. In the NHS, we have the DTAC. There are actually 120 of these frameworks globally. If anybody wants the full list, you're very welcome to it. Not all of them are in use, but governments have spent a lot of time creating this criteria. Now, it might feel like, oh my gosh, this is really fragmented and it's not coming together, and particularly as an innovator, I don't want to have to keep going through these processes. The good news is that there's lots of similarities in the questions that are being asked. And I'm going to show you a really busy slide, but I'm going to explain it to you. So what you've got are the different verticals. So you can see at the top, it says US, the European ISO standard, NHS DTAC, Canada, etc. And then what you can see running from left to right are the question sets. Now, Orcha have worked very proudly with all of these jurisdictions and more to create and support their criteria development. And what we saw was that there were a big chunk of questions that were asked that were exactly the same, particularly around clinical assurance, data privacy, usability and accessibility. Now, it doesn't look like it, but that baseline is about 60% of all of the verticals. And then, of course, we're going to have differences depending on jurisdictions. But what you can also see is in the dark blue section, particularly around clinical safety, technical stability, and security, there's again similarities. So what we're starting to see is a greater convergence, and what we see is we're going to be dropping down a lot of what was different into the baseline. Now, why does that matter? Well, why it matters is because if America have assessed a product, and then that product wants to go over to Canada, there's only 2 more areas that that solution needs to think about. What it also means is that the people who are in charge of making the decisions can trust from other countries. And that builds speed in the system so we can all get on with the distribution. Because this is interesting, but until somebody's benefited from the work, I'm here to say we've done nothing. So, how do you get the system to deploy? I use the drug analogy, and this is about knowledge, prescriptions, and supporting people to make good over-the-counter decisions. So, the first thing I want to say is, for the workforce, they are not taught about these technologies. I quite often am privileged to go and lecture medical students, and I start talking about digital health, and they look at me like I have 3 heads. And so we're not training our workforce. But one of the things that does happen is that clinicians and physicians think that there is one product that I need to know about, one product for mental health, one product for diabetes, when in fact they know that isn't true because there is not one antibiotic. There is not one drug for diabetes. And when you make that point, it becomes very clear, one size doesn't fit all. And so when we're thinking about deploying digital health and AI, we need to think, who is this going to work for? And that is really important for culture fit, language fit, whether somebody's got a visual impairment, a hearing impairment, where they are in their pathway. And these are some principles that we have to make sure that our workforce understands. What we also learn as clinicians and physicians is that there are pathways and there are different interventions at different points of the pathway. It's the same for digital health. So some technologies will work best at point of diagnosis, others in prevention, others post-crisis. And this looks complicated, but to a physician or a clinician, it doesn't, because this is what you're used to seeing, the pathway, the pain point, which is the pink dots, and then where there's an opportunity for digital to help. And this is a very, very small slither of a mental health pathway. And then, of course, what technology will work best. So when you're assessing and evaluating a technology, and what we do is we're not just looking at, does it have evidence? We're looking at who is it evidence for and where will it be most effective. And so this is about pathways of products, not single point solutions, because unfortunately, one size doesn't fit all. So once you're assured, you've got your workforce who knows about these technologies and understands why there are a range of solutions, you then need to think about your distribution channels. And again, what I'm seeing more and more, unfortunately, is that we're seeing a lot of stick, not carrot. And what I mean by that is there is a lot of focus on regulation and not a lot of distribution. And for suppliers, they will happily go through the rigor of regulation, but really what they're looking for is the distribution and the carrot. So you have to connect the two things up. And this is really important because unfortunately a lot of these technologies are dying while they're being patient. And when they die, it means that we take a hit to the economy, but we also take a hit as patients because then that product's gone. And unfortunately, investors are seeing this, and therefore what we see is less investment coming into the sector. So we have to change this. So what we do at Orcha, and we deliver these solutions across the globe in 13 different countries, is we take all of that assessment data and we focus it on distribution. So we provide citizen-facing environments, or APIs, which are promoting great technologies through campaigns to citizens. Really important because guess what? They're buying this stuff already, but they're not buying good stuff. So let's at least close that gap. The second thing we do is then we work with the electronic health records, integrate into them, so that clinicians and physicians have a digital health formulary, just like they have drug formularies. And the integration means that a pop-up can come in. So if you've got a child that's come in with asthma and you're going to prescribe Ventolin, guess what? Let's prescribe the great digital health app that's perfect for a child to teach them how to take that drug and get the best outcomes. So that's the second point of distribution, which really leads to prescription and hopefully reimbursement. And then the third thing that we're seeing more and more in particularly the NHS is automated distribution through personal health records, through text messaging services, predominantly to help people who are waiting. This is about preventing crisis. Waiting lists in the NHS are at an all-time high. You can wait over 2 years for a hip operation at the moment. And in that time, you may be experiencing pain, anxiety, sleep problems. These technologies can help. We just need a way of getting them to you. And so where we're at now is we're automating it through text messaging in a personalised way so that you get the right technology for your needs and your preferences. So trust is not about a standard, it's about a system. Or another way of describing it is it's a chain of trust. You do need assurance, but you need access and distribution and connected governance. And that chain of trust is really important because people are more likely to trust their doctor's recommendations than just finding something on the open market. And this is how we really help people to start using great technologies. Once they're using these technologies, we can then take the data out of these safe technologies and use that data for true risk stratification and population health management. So once you have the system, we've replicated what is available in the medication and drug world. And for me, that is where we have to get to, but quicker than we are. So thank you so much for listening. Happy to take a question.
Liz, thank you so much. Let's have a seat over here. So you said before, digital trust is a standard, is not a standard, it's a system.
Yeah.
How do you get public leaders to understand that putting out a law with a standard is not fully doing the job, is not all of it? How do you navigate that conversation?
Yes, I mean, for me, it's about the scope and the vision. So if the scope is to create a standard, then that's the scope. But that's all it will get you. If the scope is to improve lives through these technologies, then we're in a different conversation. And I think it's about aligning, as it quite often is, aligning the vision and aligning the objective. And I think one of the challenges that public sector organisations have is quite often there is a division to manage, or an organisation to manage the standard, and another division to look after the distribution. So when we talk about collaboration between public sector and private sector, actually we need to just talk about collaboration.
Mm-hmm. So you founded Orcha at a time when the challenge was simple to describe, hard to solve. How do we assess the quality of apps? Now, the world has moved on, and we just talked before with Mohammed about these AI systems, be it Anthropic, be it OpenAI, be it Google, whoever it is coming out with these large language models, giving a lot of health advice. Who in here, either themselves or has a friend they know is using some of these large language models for health advice? So it's happening. I'd say this is about a third or even half of the room that put their hand up. How does this impact your company or framework, and how are you adapting?
So it's a really good question. So there have been some standards. You've always got to start with the standard. So we have seen some standards emerge when it comes to AI. So the European Commission have created a standard. In the UK, the BSI have created a standard. Because they're far behind where the products are and the solutions are. And so what you see in these standards are principles, not criteria that is accessible. And I'm going to give you an example. So one of them might say, be careful if the product hallucinates, or make sure this product doesn't hallucinate.
Right, but how would I know?
Exactly. So what we've been doing, and this is something that we do a lot of, so we deconstruct standards into the sum of its parts to create accessible, objective criteria, which everybody can gather around. And in fact, right now, we're just holding a global AI advisory group. So over the last 12 months, what we've been doing is working out, okay, what are the functions and features that an AI product could have in it? Once you've got that profile, you can then say, okay, what are the risks? This one has a big risk of hallucination. This one doesn't. Okay, we now know what the risks are. The third and final question, which this advisory group are discussing right now, is what risk mitigations do we need to see? Now, of course, some of that might be evidence of testing, it might be an RCT, but it will be dependent on the profile and the risk of the product. So I think where regulation is at the moment is far too principled, and we need to make it more practical, and we're doing our part. And if anybody wants to know more, it's an open group, it's not a closed-off group, it is not proprietary information, we want to share.
One last thing, building on the previous speaker's patient impatience, I feel that that is something that unites the two of you. And congratulations for having that for so long and being so effective. But as we now look at AI, we've seen other speakers, Daniel Kraft, for example, yesterday, Jack Kreindler today, pointing out the speed of exponential technologies. You are navigating this wonderful tension between governance and innovation, basically making the case if you want to innovate at scale, governance needs to be in place. But there is this struggle of different speeds. So do you have any sort of, as a final question, ways for us to think about that? Because I think this tension is something that many of us are navigating in some shape or form.
Yeah.
But you seem to be really at the very core and heart of it.
So the key is we need to do it differently. We can't regulate and assure these technologies in the same way we have done for everything else. We just can't. It doesn't work. It's never going to work. So that means we all have to think differently, which is really hard. Now, what we can do is we can use technology to enable us to do that job far faster. And obviously, I'm not here to talk about what Orcha do, but that is what Orcha do. We built a platform that allows us to assure technologies very, very quickly, and repeatedly, and proportionately, and drive the distribution in real time and update that and have connected governance. So my big message is we need to do it differently, and as system leaders, we need to be brave to give that a go.
Well, thank you so much for your bravery, Liz.
No, thank you.
And really appreciate learning from you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are reaching that moment of wrap-up. Again, day 2 has happened. Can you believe it? It's like that. And there we are. More than halfway through this wonderful conference, though I am very much looking forward to the fact that I get another day with you tomorrow. So, just quickly, for those who have been here all day, I want to give you a short summary of absolutely non-AI generated, 100% human by n equals 1 data point, myself. But just quickly, to summarize, we had an opening by our great main partner, the minister himself, Jan Anthony Brown, a pathologist with over 40 years of training and practice. And he talked about, on one hand, pattern recognition and how obviously AI is massively affecting his particular previous job field, and also related job fields like radiology. He also talked about his current understanding of what he's doing around innovation And part of that is enabling it, but the other part of it is getting out of the way. And I think he described that tension really beautifully, and I think that's something for us as leaders, no matter where we stand, is always this question of how do we enable innovation, but also how do we sometimes do the thing of getting out of the way. A bit similar to yesterday's message from Esther Talbom, who talked about the bucket list. It's not always about addition, more processes, more platforms. It's about reduction. Which legacy system can we maybe take out of the equation? So that was the beginning of the day. Then we had a wonderful award show and 5 pitches to really make it practical. Innovation is a buzzword, but then when you see 5 entrepreneurs trying to bring innovation into this world at scale, that is really making it tangible and seeing just how important it is to keep on innovating with, as we have learned this afternoon, patient and patience, my new favorite 2 words. After the award show, we went on to hear from Jack Kreindler. We started with Darth Vader and somehow ended up in the South Pole. And in those extremes, we learned a lot about living extremely well. The reason that I really enjoyed that presentation was one of the parallels that he brought up, which I had not thought of before, which was around aviation. Thinking that you'd only do weight and height, and after 50 years, look underneath what's actually in there, does seem a little scary once you put it that way. Now, obviously, with all these devices and all the sensors and data that we can gather, we can do a lot better as individuals, but actually, really, as a system. And I think that's the task that you also put to us, to go from an individual thinking to systems thinking. So thank you for that, Jack. Finally, we went on to be reminded of the importance of inclusion. Yes, digital technology is amazing. It opens up opportunity. It's an equalizer. It democratizes, in many cases, access. Nonetheless, we do need to remember how important inclusion is. We've seen in the last digital wave that a digital divide is a concern. Now with AI, everything's accelerating, and therefore we need to really pay attention to not widen the divide, but close it. And we had some very insightful viewpoints on how to approach this from our friendly neighbor and main partner just around the corner. This afternoon, I think we've all been here. I don't want to say too much about it, but one piece that I took away from our previous keynote speaker was also the role of the public sector versus the private sector, and making that very explicit. It really takes both of us to innovate, particularly when it comes to this patient-centric approach of data, which is something that ultimately will make us achieve part of the challenge which was put to us yesterday by Larry, reducing sick span. If we can all be better stewards of our own health, then chances are we might also get a little closer to achieving that goal. That is not the whole solution, but it certainly could be a part of it. And finally, thank you so much, Liz, for giving us an overview of how to really navigate and have a compass in this world of digital apps and health. It is a field that offers so much promise. We've seen that today and yesterday in many shapes and forms, but it's a messy world as well. It's a world with many different things, and sometimes it's overwhelming. So as a patient and as a physician who truly wants to do the best they can to help, having the right compass, having the right assessment is key. And keeping that digital trust, because trust is ultimately what runs, frankly, everything. Society, the economy, politics. I'm getting philosophical here, so that's why I'll wrap it. But I think it's very, very important also as we navigate the digital world of health. With that, I come to, the final remarks of what still needs to be said on logistics. There's just one thing. As yesterday, you will receive a newsletter again with a summary. We hope that worked for all of you. If not, do come and let me know. afterwards, and we'll try to sort that out. And then tomorrow we are starting again, same thing as today, 9:15 sharp over here, so do try to be on time. And finally, enjoy Maastricht. For some, it might be the last evening here, so make the most of it. It's a beautiful city. They are also one of our main supporters, and I can only recommend it warmly. So enjoy, keep on exchanging, and one last task that I just thought of right now, in the spirit of keeping learning, and you know, usually when you walk out of these doors, you just wrap up, and you just kind of, everybody individually continues their way. I recommend, if you still have some energy, find a person you haven't talked to yet, make this a meaningful walk out the building, and exchange one thing you've learned that you didn't know before you started this morning. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.